you can call it that, had a runaway prop, and they knew the ghost was up then. So they had a ditch. And when the tail cone hit the water, the flight engineer, John Park, I'd gone through AM school with him, and gunnery school, and Glenn L. Martin, and also our flight training at school down at Barksdale together. And we flew over together. We were a two-ship formation all the way over. And he was the engineer, and his position was to get down there. There was a step right below the flight deck, and he got his shoulder up against that. And the other crew members were in the seats there in the navigator's compartment. And when he thought they were down, when it made so much noise when the after belly was riding in the water, that he raised up. And just about that time, those two engine nacelles start scooping in water, and it made a horrendous elastic stop. And the airplane just pitched forward like it was on bearings, and the nose went under, and he was catapulted forward, and he hit the pilot's pedestal, and then bounced over to the co-pilot side and went right down into the nose. The co-pilot, Johnson, made a grab for him, but of course the force there was too much for him to hold. And with that, the airplane just rotated and started down. And the first man up told me that all he saw of that airplane was the trailing edge of the rudder going under the surface. And that was the last peak they had at that airplane. And 5 of them were bobbing up there on the water in the May West. So they knew they'd lost their John Park, the engineer. And there was a couple of Spitfires that stayed with them all the way. One of them circled very low. He came down around, maybe 50 feet off the water, even lower, and he dropped the life raft. I didn't know that a fighter plane could do that, but that's what the crew told me, that they dropped the life raft to him. And they got into that, and about 15 minutes later, a launch came out and picked them up. Well, in the meantime, we had gone back and had our interrogation, and one of the guys came up to where we were sitting and says that, hey, there was a crew went in the channel, and 5 guys got out. And we said, well, geez, that couldn't have been Spencer. It's too soon. You know, I wouldn't think they could get him that quick. So sure enough, that's what happened. And about an hour and a half later, Spencer and his crew came back, and they all were wearing these RAF white turtleneck sweaters that the RAF gave them there at the hospital where they checked them over to wear temporarily. They had to give the sweaters back. They hated to do that. And then they told us that John had been lost in the story of what had happened. And Spencer was put in for the Distinguished Flying Cross for the way he managed to get that airplane down. He was the first B-26 pilot to successfully ditch an airplane in the channel. And the Air Force thought quite highly of this particular operation that they did. They took the entire crew and sent them to the other B-26 outfits in England, and they gave a seminar on the proper ditching procedure as far as individual crew member positions and pilot operations of how to control the airplane in a situation like that. So, you want to cut that for a second? September 27th, we were assigned a target at Conche, France. It was an airfield, a very active airfield at that particular time. We went through the usual procedures to get over, get through our briefing, form up and all that. And we were on our bomb run, and the flak was coming up hot and heavy all around us. And we managed to get through that okay. This was my 13th mission. Now, the fellows that rode out with me in the trucks to the hard stand kind of poking fun at me, I guess. They said, why don't you call this one 12A? I said, don't worry about this. I'm not superstitious. 13 doesn't bother me. So we cleared the target area and got our bombs away all right. And we were coming back, and one of the things they told us at briefing was stay away from St. Valery, France. They've got a flak school there. We were supposed to be about 4 or 5 miles off to one side of that on the way out. We were in the high flight. I was in the number 5 ship again, tail in Charlie as usual. So we were coming up on the coast, and I heard our bombardier say on the intercom, he says, they're too close. They're going to take us right over St. Valery. And I remember that remark that the briefing officer told us, don't graduate any gunners today. So, boy, that flak was coming up something fierce. And it seemed to be concentrated just on our flight. The lead flight wasn't getting any. The low flight wasn't getting any. It was all on ours. And I was doing my usual bobbing and weaving act in the turret. And I turned my head to the left. Boy, something slapped me in the face. All I could see was red. My face felt like somebody hit me with a hot poker. And I had my gloves on, and I put them up over my eyes. And the first thing I thought was my eyes got hit. And I wiped my face, I bring my gloves down, I saw blood all over my gloves, and then I was blinking my eyes, and they cleared. And just as I was looking ahead at the ship flying ahead of us to the right, he took a direct hit in his left engine, and the engine, the wing started to fold, and the flame was shot back about maybe 150 feet. All the fabric was burned off his elevators and his rudder. And the airplane kind of tilted off to the left and then just dropped out of formation. And it went into a spin. And we found out later that nobody managed to get out of it. The pilot there was Lieutenant Cox. So we flew on back to the mission interrogation, and they sent me over to the hospital, and Dr. Makita took care of me, and he got his swabs out and all his chemicals that he had there on his work table, and he started cleaning out my face, and he says, he says, here it is. He says, those little pieces of steel in there. And he says, you're lucky, though. He says, that was a sort of a slash. He says, that skin's going to lay down, he says, in a few weeks. He says, and you will never notice it. So he knew what he was talking about, because I had no scars whatsoever. And after I got back to the barracks, I walked in there with my face bandaged up, and guys are starting, well, was it 12B or was it 13? I said, well, I says, no, I'm not so damn sure. I'm not a bit suspicious. So 13 missions later, on my 26th mission, we were bombing over in Cherbourg, on the Cherbourg Peninsula. And they were shooting the big stuff that day. It was 128 millimeter stuff. When that burst, it looks like a two-car garage. And we were on the bomb run, and doors, of course, were open, and there was a heavy burst below us. And all that smoke just poured into the bomb bay, and of course the waste windows being open sucked all that through the airplane. It was a very acrid, bitter smell. You could actually taste it. It was like sulfur. And so in all this excitement, I was exhaled all over my gun sight, and it instantly fogged up. I couldn't see anything. The temperature at our altitude that day was 25 degrees below zero. So I braced my feet against the bar underneath the top turret, and then slid my shoulder up to the right and my back against the back seat until I could get my head out behind, alongside the right-hand gun a little bit, give that gun sight a chance to clear up. And I was over there in maybe a few, 30 seconds, I would say. And I glanced at my gun sight, and it was clear, so I slid back in the seat in a normal position, and just like that, it sounded like somebody had sawed through a plywood board with a big rip saw. A piece of flak had hit the right gun and took the right side right off the turret, and that's just where my head was just a few seconds before. So I know that it was pretty scary in there, and 200-mile-an-hour plexiglass dust flying all over the place, and luckily I had my goggles on. So 13 missions later, that dome got hit again with me sitting in there, and this time it just knocked the chip off, and it bounced around off the guns in there. And when the fourth 13 come up, I was real nervous, but nothing happened on that particular mission. And I continued on to fly, and then I had about 50-some missions in, and they told us that we could go home at 50. So then 3 generals came over one day, and on a Sunday, and we had chicken dinner, and we should have been suspicious then. And after everybody had eaten their chicken dinner with all the trains and everything, the general gets up and starts talking. He says, fellas, there's no more tours. 50 mission guys are going to have to stay. We've got the Jerry on the run, and we got a lot of new crews coming in. They need your experience. We're going to keep you here, and you're going to keep on flying. Boy, there was a lot of moaning in the room that day. So we continued to go, and I ended up with 57 missions, and they told me that I could go home if I would agree not to try to get transferred when I was